For an inequality, just like an equation, you want to get all of your variables to one side. But before you do that, let's start out by combining our like terms. So one thing I've noticed is that when we have a hard time figuring out when to do the opposite and when to just add them. If they're on the same side, we just add them together. So I'm adding the 4x and the 2x. So I don't need to subtract 2x from 4x. I'm just adding those two together, which will give me a 6x plus 7 is less than 5x plus 8. And now I'm going to take this 5x. I want to bring it over to the left. Because it's positive, I need to subtract it. So x plus 7 is less than 8. And then the last thing you need to do is move this positive 7 over. And we're going to subtract that. And then we are left with x is less than 1. So that would be my answer. X is less than 1. To graph it, we're putting an open circle at 1 on my number line. And because it's less than, our arrow goes to the left. So you will have to graph your solutions on the next quiz also. So today we're going to talk about a different type of equation, an absolute value equation. So take out your notes. And before we get into the equations, let's remember what is an absolute value. So page 6 in your note packet, what is an absolute value? Absolute value is the distance from 0. And because it's the distance, it is always positive. Because when we talk about distance, I never say, oh, okay, I'm negative 10 feet away. Like when we talk about the distance, it's always positive. So that's why the absolute value of a number is always positive. So the absolute value of positive 6, because positive 6 would be right here. So I'm going to plot. This is where I am. So positive 6 is right here. And if I count how many hops, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's why the absolute value of 6 is 6. Negative 7, even though it's on the left, if I count how many hops it takes from that green dot to get to the red dot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's still 7 hops. That's why the absolute value is always positive. 0, the absolute value of 0 is 0. What do you think the absolute value of negative 4 is going to be? Positive 4. And the absolute value of positive 4 is also positive 4. So when we're solving an equation, what this is asking me here is what numbers have an absolute value of 5? 5, and what else? Negative 5. That would be my answer. Because 5 has an absolute value of 5 and negative 5. Both of these numbers here, both of these dots are 5 hops away. So that's why there are 2 answers to that first equation. So what do you think my answer will be for my second one? What 2 numbers have an absolute value of 8? 8 and negative 8. What 2 numbers have an absolute value of 3? 3 and negative 3. So notice that we're getting 2 answers every time. But for the last one, there isn't a number that has an absolute value of -3 because absolute value cannot be negative. So this has no solution, this last one. That's a trick question. You may say, oh, okay, so it would be 3 and -3. No, there is no number that has an absolute value that is negative. So that last one is no solution. So go ahead and copy down these steps on how to solve an absolute value. In your notes, and then we'll work through a couple of equations today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add or subtract numbers on the outside, divide numbers in front. We cannot distribute and separate into separate equations, and then we're going to solve. But the key thing here is that we have to isolate it. Before we separate, we have to isolate. We have to get that absolute value by itself, and then we're going to break it apart and solve each equation. If we isolate and the absolute value equals a negative number, then we know that it is no solution. Okay, so let's go ahead. So this is a graph of an absolute value, okay? So we're going to solve this with a graph, but mainly we're solving analytically. So what we have is we have this equation right here. That V that you see, that represents this half of my equation. That half. That's already been graphed for us. And what we need to graph is this. So I want you to draw a horizontal line at y equals -4 on the graph. So at -4, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just going to draw a horizontal line straight through. How many times does that blue line cross through that graph? Twice. Does everyone see that? It crosses right here and right here. There's two different places where it crosses. And what are the x values for those two red dots? What does x equal? The first one is at 3, and where's the second one at? 7. So this has two solutions, 3 and 7. But what if we didn't have a graph? How could we figure that out? And now let's solve it analytically. So let me go ahead and copy this down again. This is the equation. So we look at our steps. We don't have anything to add or subtract, but we do have a number in front of the absolute value. Step 2, divide the number in front of the absolute value. We cannot treat this like a parentheses. We can't do this. That doesn't work for absolute value. So what we have to do is divide it. And when we divide it, we get that the absolute value of x minus 5 equals +2. And we can keep going because see how we have an absolute value equals a number that's positive? We can keep going. If this was a negative, we would stop. There's no solution. Okay? So now we're going to keep going. We're going to break it apart. So let's drop the absolute value. So my first one is x minus 5 equals +2. And what other number has an absolute value of 2? -2. So that's how we get our two equations. So now we're going to solve them both. So to solve our equations, we're adding 5. So we get x equals 7. And when I add 5 on this equation, I get x equals 3. See how we got the exact same answer that we got from the graph, but we did it analytically. So that is what we're going to practice. We're going to do a few more questions, and then we'll end for today and pick up here Monday. So let's go ahead and look at A. So again, the first thing we need to do is get rid of this -8, or +8, sorry. How do I get rid of that +8? Subtract it. So I have the absolute value of 4x minus 3 equals 21 minus 8 is 13. Which is a positive number, so we can keep going. So I'm going to break it apart. So 4x minus 3 equals 13. And then what's the other number that has an absolute value of 13? -13. Go ahead and solve both of those equations. You're solving them both the same way. You're going to add 3, divide by 4. So go ahead and get your two solutions. Absolute value has two answers. And so we have x equals 4 and x equals -10/4. You could also write that as a fraction. You could reduce it. You could also write it as a decimal. I would take either of those three answers. You don't have to write, you do not have to reduce it. You don't have to write it as a decimal. So these are all the same answer. So the main thing is, after you isolate the absolute value, we have to break it apart into two equations and solve. All right, let's look at B. So what am I going to do first for B? Add 18. So go ahead and add 18. So that would be the absolute value of 2x plus 5 equals 15. And now you're going to break it apart to two equations. So 2x plus 5 equals positive 15. And 2x plus 5 equals negative 15. All right, go ahead and solve them both. And you solve them both the same way. Subtract 5, divide by 2. So subtract the 5. So that would be 2x equals 10. Divide by 2. Who got x equals 5 as their first answer? Good. For my second one, I'm subtracting the 5. 2x equals negative 20. Divide by 2. X equals negative 10. And that would be my two solutions. Okay, we'll do a couple more. Two more. So let's look at question C. Question C, when I subtract the 10 from both sides, I get that the absolute value of 4x minus 7 equals negative 8. And I can stop right there. This has no solution. And how do I know it has no solution? Because the absolute value is all by itself and it equals a negative. So you don't need to continue. We stop right here. Because it's equal to a negative, this has no solution. So if you were to graph it, these two graphs would not intersect. All right, now let's look at question D. First, we're going to subtract this 3 in front. You cannot add that 3 plus that 5. We have to subtract the 3. So then that'll give me 5 times the absolute value of negative 2x plus 7 equals 15. And then how do you get rid of the 5 in front? We got to divide it. You cannot distribute. So we have the absolute value of negative 2x plus 7 equals a positive 3. And because it's equal to a positive number, we can keep going. So first you're going to have negative 2x plus 7 equals positive 3. Negative 2x plus 7 equals negative 3. All right, go ahead and solve them both. You solve them the same way. Subtract 7 from both sides and divide by -2. And leave both of your answers. If you get a fraction, just leave it a fraction. Oh, although I don't think you get a fraction on these, so never mind. You shouldn't get fractions. Okay, so subtract 7. Which would be -2x equals -4. Divide by -2. And x equals +2 is your first answer. Who got x equals +2? Good. And then our second answer, we subtract the 7. -2x equals -10. Divide by -2. And x equals +5. And that would be your two solutions. Okay. So for homework 2, I'll put up the due date here in a second. I am checking off homework 1 on Monday. If you have it finished and you want me to check it now, I can check it now. Homework 2, can you write that that's due on Wednesday, the 13th? And for the rest of the class, I want you to either finish up homework 1, get your points so you can get your stamp if you haven't got your stamp, or start working on homework 2 on the front side of homework 2. That is what we're doing right now. So pick one. We'll talk about how to do the back tomorrow. I mean, not tomorrow, Monday. We'll talk about that Monday.